The sun beat down on the barren plains of the Arizona Territory, 1878. A relentless furnace that promised no quarter, only a slow agonizing surrender to the heat. Elias Croft pulled his wide-brimmed hat lower, the sweat stinging his eyes as he surveyed the unforgiving landscape. At 28, he had traded his cavalry uniform for the dust of a secluded ranch, a small desolate parcel of land that fought him at every turn, much like the memories of his past. The silence here was a constant companion, a heavy suffocating blanket that pressed down on him, echoing the emptiness within. He had sought this solitude, this isolation, believing that by severing all ties, he could outrun the ghosts that haunted him. He had inherited this land from a distant uncle, a man he barely knew. And in a way, he had inherited more than just acres of dust and scrub brush. He had inherited a profound and debilitating sense of detachment. His father, a man forged in the crucible of war, had taught him that a soldier's heart was a liability. His mother, a fragile soul who had faded away soon after his return from the campaign, had reinforced that lesson in her own gentle, sorrowful way. "Keep your heart locked up tight, Elias," she'd whispered on her deathbed. Her voice a fragile wisp of a memory on the wind. This world ain't kind to those who feel too much. The world he had known had been a place of brutal efficiency, where a man was judged not by the kindness he showed, but by the strength of his will. He had lived by those lessons, locking away his heart in a vault of stoic indifference, a fortress built to withstand the ravages of war and loss. In the 2 years since he had returned from the war, he had barely spoken a word to anyone beyond what business required. The few ranchers who passed by his property thought him strange. A young man who didn't drink at the saloon, didn't attend the town socials, a man who seemed to exist in a perpetual state of absence. They whispered about him, calling him the shadow behind his back. But Elias didn't mind. He preferred the silence of the desert to the empty chatter of men who couldn't understand the darkness he carried. Loneliness was a small price to pay for peace, a necessary penance for the sins he believed he had committed. The morning had been clear, a vast azure canvas stretching to the horizon. But now, a low ominous wall of reddish-brown clouds rolled in from the west, moving with unnatural speed. Elias frowned, recognizing the signs. These weren't ordinary storm clouds. They carried the weight of a sandstorm, a tempest of blinding dust and wind that could bury a man alive. He'd seen it before, the way the air grew still and heavy, the way the animals sought shelter, their instincts screaming a warning that he had learned to heed only through hard-won experience. He spurred his horse, a stoic gelding named Ghost, toward the small adobe shack that was his home. It was barely a mile away, and he knew he had to outrun the fury of the approaching storm. But as he rode, the wind picked up with a vengeance, and the dust hit him like a physical blow, a dense, choking cloud that turned the world into a churning vortex of red and brown. Within minutes, he couldn't see Ghost's ears in front of him. The world became a white wall of fury, a hellish landscape of blinding dust and howling wind. He'd miscalculated badly. This wasn't just an early storm. This was a killer sandstorm, the kind that left a man disoriented and lost 50 feet from his own front door. Elias knew he had to find shelter, any shelter. His ranch house was at least 2 miles back, a ghost in the swirling chaos, impossible in this weather. Ghost stumbled, nearly throwing him, and he realized with growing dread that he'd lost all sense of direction. In the blinding dust, every direction looked the same. He gave Ghost her head, trusting her instincts more than his own. The gelding pushed forward, head low, fighting through drifts of sand that seemed to appear from nowhere. Elias's hands went numb inside his gloves. The fine dust coated his eyelashes, making it hard to keep his eyes open. Just when he thought they were done for, Ghost stopped so suddenly he nearly flew over her neck. Through the swirling dust, he caught a glimpse of something, a flicker of orange light, fire. His frozen mind took a moment to process it. Fire meant people. People meant shelter. He slid off Ghost, keeping one hand on her reins, and stumbled toward the light. It came from a small structure tucked against a rocky outcrop, barely visible even 20 feet away. A Navajo hogan, he realized with surprise. The round, dome shape was unmistakable, though he had never seen one this far from the reservation. Elias hesitated. Navajo. His commanding officer's voice echoed in his memory. Can't trust them, son. They smile to your face and put a knife in your back. But the sandstorm was a knife already, cutting through his coat, his skin, into his very bones. Pride and prejudice were luxuries he couldn't afford. He approached the entrance, a flap of hide that glowed from the fire within. His frozen fingers fumbled as he knocked on the wooden pole beside it, a courtesy his mother had taught him. Always announce yourself, she'd said. Manners matter, even at the edge of the world. Hello? His voice came out as a croak. I'm sorry to bother. I'm caught in the storm. The flap pulled aside, and Elias found himself looking into dark eyes that held both weariness and surprise. A young woman stood there, perhaps 25 years old, with long black hair braided down her back. Behind her, another woman, slightly younger, rose from beside the fire. Both wore traditional dress, soft deerskin decorated with beadwork that caught the firelight. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Elias knew what they saw, a white man armed at their door. He could see their tension, the way the older one's hand moved to something at her belt, a knife, probably. He couldn't blame them. The treaties meant nothing out here. White men had given them plenty of reasons for distrust. Please, he said, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely speak. My horse and I were lost. I mean no harm. The younger woman looked back at her companion. Her sister, Elias guessed, seeing the resemblance. They exchanged words in their own language, quick and low. Then the older one nodded slightly. Come, the younger woman said in accented English. Bring horse. Elias nearly wept with relief. He tugged Ghost forward, and the women showed him where to tie her on the lee side of the hogan, somewhat protected from the worst of the wind. His fingers were too numb to work the knots, and without a word, the older sister took over, her hands quick and efficient. Inside the hogan, the warmth hit him like a physical blow. A small fire burned in the center, smoke rising through the opening at the peak. Wool blankets and buffalo robes created a cozy circle around the flames. The space smelled of smoke, leather, and something else, herbs, maybe, or tea brewing in a pot near the coals. Elias stood awkwardly near the entrance, dripping melting sand, unsure of the protocol. The younger woman gestured to a spot near the fire. Sit. You freeze standing there. He collapsed more than sat, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. The older sister studied him with intelligent eyes, then said something to her sister, who nodded and began preparing something in a small clay pot. I'm Elias Croft, he managed. I have a ranch about 3 miles south, or at least I think it's south. Hard to tell in the storm. I am Leah, the younger woman said, surprising him with a name that sounded soft and melodic. This my sister, Ayana. Leah, Ayana, not the names he'd expected. He must have shown his surprise because Leah smiled slightly. Mission school, she explained. They give us new names. Say our real names too hard for white tongue. There was no bitterness in her voice, just matter-of-fact acceptance. Ayana handed him a cup of something hot. The ceramic burned his frozen fingers, but he held on, letting the heat seep into his bones. The first sip made him cough. It was strong, bitter, with an aftertaste of juniper and something earthy. Medicine tea, Leah said. Warm you inside. As feeling returned to his extremities, pain came with it. His fingers and toes burned as if held to hot coals. He must have shown it on his face because Ayanna spoke for the first time. Pain is good. Means no frostbite. Drink more. They moved around him with quiet efficiency, hanging his wet coat near the fire, offering him a blanket for his shoulders. Their kindness confused him. Everything he'd been taught said Navajo were savage, cruel, not to be trusted. But here were two young women sharing their shelter, their medicine, their warmth with a stranger who represented everything that had been taken from their people. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why help me?" He gestured vaguely at himself, unable to finish. Leah and Ayanna exchanged glances again. Then Leah sat across from him, her face serious in the firelight. "Storm does not care if you're white or Navajo. Cold kills all same. We know what it means to need shelter." The wind rattled the hogan walls, but inside the fire crackled peacefully. Elias found himself relaxing for the first time and he couldn't remember how long. The tea was working its magic, warmth spreading from his belly outward. "You live here?" he asked, then immediately felt foolish. Obviously, they lived here. "For now," Ayanna said. "We move with seasons." The storm raged on outside, but inside the hogan an unexpected peace descended. Elias, for the first time in years, found himself talking, truly talking. He told them about his ranch, about the isolation that had become his chosen prison, about the ghosts of his past that had followed him from the battlefield. He didn't mention the names of the men he had seen die, the faces of the children caught in the crossfire, the cries that still echoed in his nightmares. Instead, he spoke of the endless work, the struggle to make something from nothing in a land that seemed determined to break him. They listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that showed they understood more about the harsh realities of the frontier than he had expected. "You have no woman?" Leah asked eventually. "No children?" Elias felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the fire. "No. I keep to myself." Ayanna tilted her head, studying him with those penetrating dark eyes. "Young man with land, with horse. White women must want you for husband. I don't. That is, I haven't." He stopped, frustrated by his inability to explain. How could he tell them that he'd never even held a woman's hand? That the thought of courtship, of opening his heart to another person, terrified him more than any sandstorm. He had been trained to kill, not to love. He was a weapon, honed for one purpose, and he couldn't see how to be anything else. But somehow they seemed to understand without words. Ayanna poured more tea, and Leah added another log to the fire. They didn't press, didn't tease, just accepted his awkwardness with a grace he didn't deserve. As the night deepened and the storm showed no signs of abating, Elias realized something had shifted inside him. For the first time since leaving the army, he didn't feel alone. These two women, who by all accounts and laws should have been his enemies, had shown him more genuine warmth and acceptance than he'd experienced since his mother's death. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For the shelter, the tea, he gestured helplessly, unable to articulate what he meant. Leah smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to beautiful. "A lonely soldier took shelter with two Navajo sisters," she said, her eyes twinkling with a shared secret. "This night will change him forever." Elias choked on his tea. "I'm not, how did you?" Ayanna laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "We have eyes. We see man who does not know women. Is nothing shameful." But Elias felt the shame anyway, burning hotter than the fire. Here he was, supposed to be the superior one, the civilized one, yet these women saw through him completely, saw his inexperience, his fear, his loneliness, and still offered him shelter. The wind howled louder and the Hoban walls shuddered, but inside, wrapped in warmth and unexpected acceptance, Elias Croft began to feel something he'd thought lost forever, the possibility of connection, of understanding, of a life beyond mere survival. As the fire burned low and his eyelids grew heavy, he thought he heard his mother's voice on the wind, but this time, instead of warning him to lock his heart away, she seemed to whisper, "Sometimes, Elias, the greatest courage is in learning to trust." The first thing Elias noticed when he woke was the silence. The howling wind that had driven him to shelter had died to a whisper. Gray morning light filtered through the smoke hole above, casting the interior of the Hogan in soft shadows. The fire had burned low, just embers glowing beneath white ash. He lay still for a moment, disoriented. The events of the previous night seemed almost dreamlike: the sandstorm, the desperate search for shelter, the unexpected warmth of the two Navajo women who had taken him in. But the smell of smoke and leather, the soft breathing from across the fire pit, told him it was all real. Leah sat near the entrance, working on a piece of pottery, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Ayanna was nowhere to be seen. When Leah noticed he was awake, she set aside her work. "Storm passed," she said simply. "Your horse as well." Elias sat up, his body stiff from sleeping on the ground. Though the wool blankets had been more comfortable than he'd expected. "I should go," he said, though something in him resisted the idea. "Check on my ranch." Leah nodded but made no move to hurry him. Instead, she reached for a pot near the fire. "Eat first. Long ride." She handed him a wooden bowl filled with something that looked like porridge but smelled of sage and wild onions. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The first spoonful was surprisingly good, hearty and warming with chunks of what might have been dried venison. "This is good," he said, meaning it. "Thank you." A small smile touched her lips. "White men usually don't like our food." "White men are fools," he said without thinking, then flushed at his own words. Leah's smile widened. "Sometimes yes, sometimes no." "You not fool." I think just, she searched for the word. "Lonely." The accuracy of her observation made him uncomfortable. He focused on eating, but she wasn't done. "Why you live alone? Your parents gone?" "Fever took them 2 years ago." "No brothers, sisters?" He shook his head. "Just me. It's hard being alone. We know this." Her voice carried a weight of experience beyond her years. "Ayanna and me, we have only each other now. Father killed an army sweep. Mother died of sickness after brothers taken to reservation." Elias knew about the army sweeps. He'd been a part of them. The guilt was a familiar heavy weight. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Ayanna entered then, carrying an armload of firewood, sand-dusting her hair. She spoke to Leah in Navajo, her tone questioning. Leah responded, and Ayanna's eyebrows rose. She studied Elias with those penetrating dark eyes, then said something that made Leah laugh. "What?" Elias asked suspiciously. "She says you look less like frozen rabbit this morning," Leah translated. "More like nervous deer." Despite himself, Elias smiled. It felt strange on his face, like using muscles that had atrophied. Nervous deer is probably accurate. Ayanna set down the wood and came to sit by the fire. "You have woman waiting?" she asked bluntly. "Wonder where you are?" "No," Elias said, then felt compelled to add, "No one wonders where I am most days." The sisters exchanged one of their meaningful looks. Then Leah rose gracefully. "Come, we show you something." Curious, Elias followed them outside. The world had transformed overnight. The sand lay thick and pristine, turning the harsh landscape into something almost magical. The sun was breaking through clouds, making everything sparkle. But what caught his attention was their shelter itself. He'd been too desperate last night to really look, but now he saw how cleverly it was positioned, protected by the rock outcrop, angled to deflect wind, near a small spring that gurgled beneath a thin sheet of sand-covered ice. This wasn't a temporary camp. They'd been here a while. "You built this?" he asked, impressed. "Navajo women build homes," Ayanna said with quiet pride. "Men hunt, fight. Women make life possible." She showed him their food cache, carefully hidden and protected from animals. Leah pointed out the herbs growing in sheltered spots, explaining their uses. This one for fever, that one for wounds, another to keep meat from spoiling. Elias found himself fascinated. His mother had known some plant medicine, but nothing like this. "How do you remember it all?" he asked. "Mother teach daughter, grandmother teach mother," Leah explained. "Goes back forever. White man's schools try to make us forget," but she tapped her temple. "Something's too deep to forget." They were circling back to the hogan when Ayanna suddenly stopped, her body tense. She said something sharp in Navajo, and Leah's hand went to the knife at her belt. Elias followed their gaze and saw riders in the distance. 3 men moving slowly through the sand. "Get inside," Ayanna ordered. "Now." But Elias recognized the lead rider's jacket. "Wait, that's my Uncle Edward." They must be looking for survivors from the storm. The women relaxed marginally, but didn't lower their guard. Elias understood their caution. 3 white men finding 2 Navajo women alone could go bad quickly. "I'll talk to them," he said. "Tell them I sheltered here. They won't cause trouble if I'm here." Ayanna looked skeptical, but Leah nodded. "We trust you." Those 3 words hit him unexpectedly hard. When was the last time anyone had trusted him with anything important? The riders approached slowly, horses struggling through the deep sand.